Okay, so hello everyone. So today I'm going to, we're going to continue to talk about HTML, and then today we're going to learn CSS style code. So let's just begin. One announcement that I could tell you is that the quiz that was published on Tuesday, it is available until Sunday, but also you can take it up to 3 times. So if you had some trouble, you got some incorrect answers, if you got some trouble, entering exactly the right answer, you can just take it again and then get the right answer. Again, the purpose here is not to, actually to make you to check out the lecture recording and get to know, get to understand what I teach rather than evaluate. So that's the whole purpose of quiz. So you can take it again if you had some trouble. Okay, so these are the HTML tags that we have learned so far, and I think this is good enough to build probably whatever we want in this class. Of course, there are some HTML tags that we need, such as form, input, but in general, these are like probably we're not gonna need drastically more HTML tag than what we have learned so far. Okay, so last time what we did was we were talking about, so this is the slide from the last time. We were looking at HTML element syntax, an empty element, which does not have content. And we looked at nested elements. And we looked at the semantic HTML elements where, although it does not have any specific rendering style or functionality, sometimes it's nice to, have some meaningful, use meaningful text so that the web page is well organized and you can understand how HTML page is structured. The other thing that we learn is generic element, where it does not have any semantic meaning, but these are very often used HTML tag to create a logical grouping of content. So div is one of them, and span is another one. The only difference between div and span is that div is block elements, which is going to introduce line breaks before and after, and span is inline element, which is basically like text in the middle of a paragraph. So this is again like the red part is block and blue part is inline. So we talked about, using this semantically meaningful HTML tags are more preferable than using generic elements. But all the time, a lot of time we have to use these generic elements, and then we may want to style them differently. We might want to have some different interactive behavior. So how do we do that? And then we're gonna learn about two very important attributes that we should know. First one is ID. So again, attribute is something that could be included in HTML syntax. And one HTML element can have more than one attributes. And this attribute particularly is ID, which is going to identify an element. So here, it says ID is used to assign a unique identifier to an element in the document. The value of ID must be used only once. So if you have a certain element and then you can assign attribute ID with some value of the value of your choice, and then this value here, it should be unique identifier, which means that any other HTML elements should not have the exactly same ID value. So ID is needed to identify an HTML elements. Sometimes you can have it, like sometimes you don't have to have it. It's not like necessary. I mean, it's optional basically. Class is another attribute, another global attributes. So what I mean by global attributes means that any element, any HTML element can have it. So class is used to classify elements into conceptual group. And one element can belong to multiple classes, delimited by spaces, and one class can have more than one elements. So in this case, there are two classes. This is one class attribute, and these have three value: book, big font, info, which means that this particular HTML element belongs to three different classes, which is book, big font, and info, which I don't know what that means at the moment. Another class for this particular span element, you can see the example of how multiple elements can belong to one class, where these three HTML elements belongs to the class called tel, which is basically shorthand for telephone. So yeah, and like class name can have, ID name and class name can only have alphanumeric value, hyphen, and underscore. So yeah, and this, why do we need ID and class? So it's useful to assign a semantic meaning on elements, obviously. So in case we need to use generic elements and we want to assign some, semantic meaning, which is like in this case, telephone number was the meaning of this particular class. But like the more importantly, ID, this is necessary for separation of concern, where like how do JavaScript and CSS know what to do with HTML elements, right? So sometimes JavaScript need to add some interactive behavior to HTML elements, and sometimes CSS need to add like certain style to particular elements, and then you have to select certain elements, and then like one way to select elements is to use either ID or class. So, and then we're going to go into that today. So this is basically one example where hey, like you have this HTML content, and if you want to style these particular content differently from the rest of the HTML content, you can use these kind of CSS syntax to style them differently. For in this case, there's a typo. We are setting the font color of telephone class to blue, and we are setting the font size of address book, the HTML element that the ID whose ID is address book to 30 pixel. So let's try this. So I don't know if you remember this website that I made last time, and then we have this element that we used in the slide. So here's the code. So let's add a style code, and then we're going to look at it later. But for now, I'm going to add a style code here. And then just grab this guy. Then indent it correctly. So right now, I haven't saved it yet. So right now, you can see the default style is like just black, and then it has default font size. And then if I refresh, it's still the same. But if I come back and then save this file, now this CSS code is going to change the style of particular class and then the element with a particular ID. So this, the whole UL element has ID named address book, and then the telephone number is wrapped around with this span tag, and then class of them is tel, which is telephone. So I saved it and then refresh it. And now you can see that font size is 30 pixel. And then now the telephone number has blue color. And then you can just play with it. Like, instead of blue, let's try, I don't know, brown maybe, or purple even. Instead of 30 pixel, maybe make it smaller by, let's say, 5 pixel. Then go back. If I refresh it, and now it's almost invisible. Maybe 55 could make it much more apparent. So yeah, these are the how CSS is going to use ID and class to select certain element, and then you can change the style of certain elements. So that's what we wanted to do at the end of the last lecture. Class and ID is very important attribute that you're going to use very frequently to be able to add some interactive behavior from JavaScript, but also to stylize certain elements. So we're going to come back to this when we study JavaScript or jQuery even. But today we're just going to use it in the context of stylizing code, HTML code. Okay, so let's move on. So now we're going to learn CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So remember this separation of concern, and like in the context of front-end web programming, we have three concerns. First one is content, which is basically, done by HTML code. And the presentation is, like CSS is used to control presentation, and interactive behavior, JavaScript take care of the interactive behavior. So we had this nice metaphor of like HTML being the backbone, bare bone, JavaScript being muscle, which makes our body moves, and CSS is basically the style appearance of that, the content. So we play with this like getting rid of CSS file in any website using inspector. So let's try that one more time. Maybe today I'm gonna go to apple.com, which looks pretty fancy. But without CSS, it's gonna look pretty dull. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna again open inspector, and then I have a lot of elements. And then basically what I'm gonna do is find CSS file and get rid of it. So to find code, I'm gonna press Command F, and then I can find any string in the code. But Command F, or like if it was a window, it's probably is Control F. So I'm gonna look up CSS. Now, let's look at .css. Now you can see there are 5 CSS files included in this HTML file. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So let's just double click it and then get rid of it. Now you can see on the left side, some of the styles is gone. And keep deleting HTML file, not CSS file. One more. Okay, now we don't have any CSS. And then, as you can see, like Apple website is without CSS file, it's just like bunch of content, bunch of like a hyperlink, hypertext. So basically, it has its own content, but without CSS, it can look very dull. So I guess, which is like, what I'm trying to highlight here is that you have like, once you have a content that you want to present, you have a power to stylize them in any way that you want with CSS files or CSS syntax. So yeah, another example that I would like to present was this like a www.csszerzengarden.com. So basically what this website is, like they have one content and they ask for different like style, like a CSS file. And then like, anybody can submit like CSS file and then you can present the same content in different appearance using the submission, and then each submission gets reviewed. So let's see. This is basically the content, CSS Zen Garden, and you can see that the very first sentence is saying a demonstration of what can be accomplished through CSS-based design. Select any style sheet from the list to load it into this page. So yeah, basically, you can basically this content is exactly the same across different design, but you can see how it can look drastically different from each other. So let's check out all the design. Okay, so there are a lot of them. So let's check this out. And then you can see the content is exactly the same. A demonstration of what can be accomplished through CSS-based design. Let's try something else. Go back. How about this guy? Oh, this is what we saw. Or this one. You see exactly the same sentence that we have here. And yeah, again, it's still the same thing. And then you can see without CSS file, like every page that we have here will look exactly the same because it's just HTML content. So I guess that's like, that shows the power and expressivity of CSS file or CSS code. So what is the benefit of CSS? Like CSS is has a very precise type, and you can control layout very precisely. And then it requires less work. Like imagine that you had to specify style per HTML tag, and you can imagine there's going to be a bunch of a lot of work that you have to do, like, and then maintaining code will be very, very cumbersome because like once you change the style, you have to change lots of different code. But like if you use CSS file, you can share one CSS file across different pages, and then like just updating that particular page is going to update the style of like, multiple pages that include that particular CSS file. And then you can make more accessible site by marking up content, and it has reliable browser support. So this is like a basic CSS syntax, and I would say it's pretty easy. So there are 3 elements, actually 4 elements. The first one is selector. Selector, basically how you specify which elements that you want to stylize. So this is selector. And then once you select an HTML elements, you have to specify property and assign certain value. For example, let's say font size is 12 pixel, or font color is red, or what else? Margin is 20 pixel, and so forth. So property is one component, and then value is another component. Comment, it can still have a comment in CSS rules or CSS code with these like, common signs, symbols for comments. Although the double backslash does not work, like only this backslash with asterisk close by the asterisk and backslash, that only this style of a comment should work. And then you notice that like there's going to be colon between property and value, which is essential. Like if you don't have that, it's not going to work. Also, semicolon is essential. If you don't have it, it's not going to work. So this is example, like, what it does is like it's going to select H1 tag, which is basically like the HTML tag that we learned. And then we're going to set font size to small and set the font color to red and margin to 12 pixel. And you can put some comments. And then in CSS code, you can have multiple elements. So in this case, it's specifying the style of div element, and it's setting its font color to blue. So that's like the essence of CSS syntax. So before we go into this, like how do we include CSS to HTML? Where to include it? Like typically as a child of head element, because it's one element, or I mean, there could be multiple style tag. There are 3 ways to include your CSS. The first one is to simply specify the rule within HTML file. So, or add as a file, as an external file with link tag, or like you can add a style attribute in any HTML elements. So yeah, let's check this out one by one. So this is the example of specifying rule inside style tag, and then hopefully you remember this starter code. Any HTML files should look like this, like this should have like structure of HTML element and header and body. And header is invisible part. It contains like information about the page. Body is the actual element that's going to contain all the visible element in the page, on the page. So yeah, so basically this is example of, you could basically say start a tag, style tag, and then write any number of CSS rules, and then close with backslash style tag. So this is one way. So let's actually try that, because we had this website. Oh, actually we tried this already. So instead of this, let me go back to my website. And then I don't know if you remember this particular element was H1. So I'm going to set H1 to have some style. Let's say color. I think it would be nice to be green. And then maybe font. I want different size of like different font family. I'm not sure if Arial work. Okay, save it. And then like this, like if I refresh it, this part should change. If I refresh it, now it has different color and different font family. Again, don't worry about the name, like which, like the property name, property values. We're going to go into these later, but right now just focus on this like a way to specify style in HTML. So let's do one more. I think this was H2. So I'm going to copy this and put it there and then say it's H2 instead of green. I guess it would be nice to have some blue or in this case, I'm going to use RGB code. So RGB code, and then I don't know if you know it, but basically RGB code is hexacode of R, G, and B. So because sometimes I don't know what exact like color that I want, I look up I look up color using internet. So color picker is probably a good way to find the color. So, okay. How about something like close to Virginia Tech color? Maybe this, and then you get this nice hex code, and go back. And then set the color and refresh it. I get this nice Virginia Tech colored header, the second level header. Actually, I'm gonna check out the actual color code. So NCAA website has like a hex code. So the color, name of the color has Chicago maroon. It has its own hex color. So I'm gonna change the header 1 to main color, and then the header 2 to blunt orange, and then say this is blunt orange. I'm gonna put the comment right next to after semicolon, and this was Chicago maroon. Save it and go back, refresh, and then I get this nice Virginia Tech, themed header fonts. That's cool. Okay, so that's basically, where are we? We just did added internal CSS. So we specified style tag and then added a two CSS rules, one for H1 tag, the other for H2 tag. And then the interesting thing is that if there is multiple elements, let's say right now, technical skill is not just deep, plain text, but if I specify this to be H2, which is second level header, And then even favorite movie scene. I think it would be nice if I use H2 because it's gonna use the same style that is specified by the CSS rules. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Let's go to another way to add like a CSS rules. Another way is to use external file and then use this link to that particular external file. So what I'm gonna do is just grab this guy, copy this, and then add inside header. By the way, like it's canonical norm to add style or link inside the head HTML tag. So right now we have this, and then let's save it, and then go back. And if I refresh it, nothing happens. And then if I look at the inspector, actually there is one error. The error says, hey, failed to load resource, file not found. So basically style.css is the file that I need to have. And then remember, this is like a relative path. It's going to look up style.css in the same folder that this HTML file is. So what I'm going to do is create a new file and name it style.css. So now we have a blank file. And then basically what I do is, like what I have to do is just grab this guy, and then let's just keep the style for a moment, and then put the HTML, not HTML, CSS rules. And the nice thing is that because now it knows it's like its file extension is CSS, it has its nice like syntax highlighting, and then it knows which part is property, which part is selector, which part is value. And then probably it will even suggest certain value if you use like modern code editor. Like what I'm using is atom.io. So if I press colon, it's going to give me some suggestion. So yeah, let's use fantasy. I don't know what fantasy means. For H1, maybe use cursive. I don't know what cursive is. I've never used it, but let's save it. And then this was included here. And then we took out this style that we specified. And then if I refresh it, now you see that error is gone. But like, still we have a particular style for these H1 and H2. Yeah, I'm not sure if whether I like this particular font. Maybe this is cool, but this is not my cup of tea. So I'm gonna change this to fantasy as well. Save it. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, actually. And then now we can have like a question of what if there's both of them? Is it gonna work? Let's say we have this link included style.css, and then what if we have exactly the same thing, but in this case, I'm gonna specify red and blue and see what it does. So basically what I'm trying to do is show you what happens if there's conflict. So remember this, like this is going to say, hey, H1, your font color is red, but in this particular external CSS file, it's gonna say, hey, your color is this particular version of the color. And then let's see what happened. So I saved it and then go back and refresh. and it does not have any, it looks exactly the same. What if I switch the order? So I'm going to switch the order and put style after style.css. And let's see. So again, the style tag use red and blue, and then external CSS file that we added using link file is going to use Virginia Tech color. So let's check out. If I refresh, now it's using red and blue, which is basically the more recent code, like more recent CSS rule is gonna, you know, override the previous ones. So what if it does not have any conflict? So let's say style.css, what would be a good one? So I'm gonna say background color, and then say it's gonna use yellow. And then in this H1, it does not have property called background color. Well, and then what do you think will happen? One potential result is maybe it's like the font color will be red, but it's gonna have because it overrides the previous property, which was Chicago maroon color. But then because it does not have background color, maybe it will be in yellow, or maybe not. So let's check it out. So I saved it, save post file, and then refresh. Now, interestingly, the font color is coming from here. Oh, actually, I should get rid of this. Font color is coming from style tag, but then background color is coming from this external file. And you can actually see that in the inspector. So if you go back, if you remember this button to locate this particular element, and then you can see the style, 3 different style for H1. And then you can see the source. So basically, this is coming from HTML file, and this is coming from style.css, which is included, added to the HTML file using link tag. And you can see this like color is crossed out and font family is crossed out because it's overwritten by these 2 things. So, and then this is basically default rendering for H1. User agent style sheet is basically the default browser rendering. And then you have all the CSS rules that are available, and then you can see which one is overridden. But the other good feature in Inspector is that you can check out the computed style sheet, computed like a style rules, and you can check, oh, color is actually RGB 255, which is basically red. But then where is coming from? Like, style.css was trying to set it to this orange maroon color, but it was overridden by this my website HTML style tag. So yes, so this is how you can check out which style sheet is specifying the style of this particular element. And then again, you can change the color in any way you want using inspector. So let's make it green, and then you can see this part is green. Oh, now I can even check out the color of each pixel, which is pretty cool. But again, this is not going to, like, changing the value of style rows does not mean that it's going to change update the original file. For example, if I refresh the page, it's going to go back to the original one. Okay, so I don't know if that makes sense, but like hopefully you'll be able to rewatch this video. And then I like the fact that I'm doing this in recording, so you can watch it over and over again until you understand what it does. If it was a class, it would have been very quick, and then it could have been challenging for some people. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of background yellow because I don't really like that color. And get rid of this. And let's go back to this nice Virginia color and fantasy font family. Okay, so let's go back. So we looked at like adding internal CSS using style tag, and this was adding external CSS file using link tag, and you have to specify 3 different attributes. Everything is needed, like yeah, I don't think I know what rel represents, but like this is basically something that you would have to have for any style that CSS. And then this is going to be URL. You can use a relative URL or absolute URL. So basically, you can actually grab a CSS file from other website and then like just use that, like enter absolute URL to use someone else's CSS file, for example. Last way to add is to actually style is global attribute that any HTML elements can have. So you can like put style tag and then specify the CSS row, and then it doesn't have to be just one, it could be multiple, and you can do this. Like, let's try this. Let's fix this thing. Okay, so now if you remember correctly, if you remember what we did, now we have Virginia Tech color for H1, orange color for H2. But let's say I want to specify style tag for this guy, references. So references, where is references? So there you go. So references is not wrapped by any HTML tag. So I'm going to use the generic HTML tag that we learned last time, which is basically inline span element. So if I save it, go back, if I refresh, nothing is changing. Probably we can use div element as well. And it looks exactly the same. But then here I can specify style attribute being, hey, I want this color to be, what will be a good one? FF 33AA, which means that these two are R value, this G value, this is blue. So I have a lot of weights on red and blue, which is going to look like probably reddish purple. So let's check that out. Save that, and then just look at this part carefully. Now it has new color, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to make it bigger. Font size be 20 pixel, 30 pixel. Again, do not worry about this, like the name of properties and values. We're gonna go into this like later, but right now just focus on how we add CSS code, like CSS rules in elements. So I added this and then saved it. If I refreshed it, now it's in much bigger font size, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so maybe, let's say I want to, for some reason, I want to highlight this to R and E in the middle, and I'm going to use span element that we learned last time, which is generic inline element. And then add a style. I'm going to just grab this guy. And then make this even bigger. And then change the color to more bluish purple. So AAFF. And I saved it. If I refresh, what's going to happen? So only the things in the middle, 2 letters in the middle, which is wrapped around with this span tag. Now it has its own, style rules, and actually, this is basically why we learn div element and span element. And then if you want to have some style for certain groups of content, you can actually use this div tag or span tag to apply certain style. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. One experiment that I would like to do is to actually change the style of something that is that is already stylized. So remember that technical skills is H2, and H2 has its own style based on this CSS file. So it's used blunt orange, orange, and then it used font family fantasy. But what if I have inline style attribute for this particular part? So what's going to happen? Like, so we may have conflict because here there's 2 different color, one coming from this span element, the other coming from the CSS file. So let's save it and see what happened. So we got to look at this part. Now it used the rule that are available in this span, but also you can see that the font family is fantasy. So actually CSS rules are combined, and then it used a color of purple one. So which means that it got color from this particular style rule, but it got font family from this one, because this style rule does not include any font family. But if I add one, font family, it's going to be Arial, or let's try monospace, and add semicolon. And then go back. Let's check out what the font family will be. Now it has completely different font family. So yeah, so basically if it has conflict, it's going to use the inline element will have more priority. So it's going to override any rules that we have. And then you don't even have to have a span element. Like you can just put this guy here. Get this, like copy this one and then put it under H2 tag, which means that now this particular style rule is going to be applied to the whole text technical skills. So let's save it, refresh it. Now we have a completely different header. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of it. Get rid of it. And then maybe I'm gonna use header for references like H2, just for the sake of being consistent. Okay, looks much better. Very cool. So, but my recommendation is to go with the external CSS file. Why? Because it means that it's gonna, imagine that you have to specify style attributes for all the elements that you want to stylize, which is gonna be lots of work, first of all, in the beginning. But if you want to update your design, it's going to be a lot of work to update it, like maintain your code. So, but the same argument could works for internal CSS. Like if you want to add like a style tag and then specify all the rules within an HTML file, which means that every HTML file should have style tag. And then if you want to change like the theme, like maybe your website has 20 different files, but then every file has style tag. And if you want to update like the font color of the entire website, you would have to change 20 times. Whereas if all 20 files include one CSS file, just for the sake of consistent style, you can actually have, you don't have to like go over 20 different files. You can just update one CSS file and then now the style is updated automatically for all the 20 files. So again, my recommendation, and then probably not only mine, but everyone's general recommendation is that go with the external CSS file, which means you're gonna do this one. The link, you're going to use the link tag and specify these three things. So just for the sake of being explicit, let's check out what REL attributes are. So REL is required attribute. One of the value could be style sheet. This is what we're using, but what does it stand for? Relationship. Okay, it's basically stand for relationship between the current document and the link to document and resource. So you can imagine we're going to use the same thing for some other link to documents. So REL was relationship and href was URL. Type is basically media type. And then if you can go in, you will see what kind of values that you can have. Look at these media types, and then probably one of them will be style sheet, which is not pretty obvious from here. Interesting. Okay, so hopefully you can just grab this code and then put it in your my website.html. And I strongly encourage you to play with these, like at least two property, maybe color and font family. And yeah, I mean, like maybe pause the video and then like play with header in your website.html using this external CSS file. Okay, so let's move on. So again, we looked at 3 different ways to add a file, add a CSS rules. One way is to use the style tag. The other is use the link tag. And the last one is like using, adding style attributes in any HTML elements. So again, we have seen this, like, if you have style tag, and then if you have a style attribute, like the inline style is going to have more priority. So if you like, grab this thing, let's actually grab this code and then test it. To test it, what I could do is like create a file, but there's a easy way to test it, which is basically, some of you may know this already, but there are lots of websites that I can actually enter HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file and then get the result immediately. And one of the popular websites is called CodePen.io, but like this is just one of them. But basically, if you do this, like, copy and paste code, and it's going to give you the result on the bottom. Again, this is not the only one website. Like there are other websites, like JSPin is another one. More or less, you're going to get the same thing. So here, if I add it, you get this result right away. But what we tried here was that, hey, we have conflict, like H1 in this style tag, H1 color should be red, and based on this style attribute, H1 like this element should be in blue. So which one wins? Basically, the inline style attribute wins over style tag that is included, or even link tag for external CSS file that is included. So yeah, you can actually play with different color, brown or gray. I don't know what else we have, purple, red for sure. What else do we have? White, you can see that, black, and so forth. But this one still works. Like if it doesn't have a conflict, like let's say font size will be 5 pixel, and then now you can see the font size changes. Let's say 55 to make it bigger and so forth. Okay, so if there's a conflict, the inline style will win. Now we just learned how to add like CSS code to HTML file. Now we're going to learn selector, how to specify HTML elements in CSS code. And then we have already looked at it, like, basically one way to specify an element is to basically write down the tag name, and it's going to select all the elements that has the like particular tag name. So it's going to select multiple H1 elements. Yeah, so what should we do? So we're going to look at selectors, like, this part only for now. And then again, don't worry about this part. We're going to look at it later. There's like a bunch of properties that we're going to learn, And then like per each property is going to require a different value. So we're going to look at it later, probably next time. But today we're going to only look at selector. How do we specify which elements that we want to stylize? Stylize. Okay, so the very first one that we already saw is element selector or tag selector, basically. Tag selector is rather better name. And then what you do is, just like write down the tag name. And then tag name got to be like, existing HTML tag. Like, it cannot be random. It got to be something that we, something that exists. Like, like for our case, these are the tags that we learned so far. So it could be a, it could be div, it could be span, image, article, section, and so forth. So these, this is basically one way, and then you can even select body, which is basically everything, like, all the visible content, and then setting the color, font color to blue in this case. So yeah, let's try this. Tag selector. So we already have done it like a little bit, but let's add one more. What kind of HTML tag do we have? We have image, we have HR, we have P. So maybe P is something that we can try. So P, and then I open a curly bracket, and then what should we do? Maybe I'm gonna just make the font family consistent. Or actually what we can do is like set the whole document, the font size of the whole document, not font size, like font family of the whole document to be fantasy. So I'm going to get rid of these two, and then select body element, which is basically the top level element, this guy, like top level element of visible content. And then I'm going to set it to fantasy. So I saved it, go back and refresh. And what's going to happen is that everything now it's rendered using this particular font. Now it looks a little bit, cheesy. So I'm going to change my mind to use something else. Will be a good one. What's sans serif? Let's try this guy. Okay, not bad. I think it's pretty modern. So maybe I want to have some sort of like a title for this part as well. So I'm going to put one more header in front of my bio. So let's get this guy, copy it, and then say bio. Actually, it's not a bio, it's rather reading, because I'm using I statement. Saved it, refresh. Now I have a separate header for bio or like intro. Let me actually now get rid of horizontal line, because that like section title or header creates a like nice division between content. Do you have any more HR? Nope. Okay. So I saved it. Now if I refresh it, these lines will be gone now. Okay. Okay, it looks pretty, not, not awesome, but like decent at least. So we looked at tag selector. Next thing that we're going to look at is ID selector. Basically, applying the specified style to the element that has the specified ID. Okay, so in that case, we use this hashtag, and whatever that comes after hashtag is going to be ID value. And then you can apply the same kind of rule. So let's see, do I ever use ID? Probably not. Oh, I have ID. Okay, one ID. That's good. So let's use this guy, address book. Basically, this is this part, and these are the people who's gonna tell people that, tell the world that I'm capable of something, like, references, like go for recommendation letters or just for recommendation. So where do we go? I'm gonna go to CSS file and then use hashtag address book and then open a curly bracket. And what should we do? I didn't specify anything, so nothing is going to happen. But let's say we might want to make this slightly bigger, maybe. So I'm gonna say font size, and then you can see that like this particular editor is helping me to autocomplete this property. And I'm gonna say this should be about 20 pixel, and then saved it, and then let's go and refresh the page. Okay, now it's slightly bigger. So, and then maybe let's do something else. Maybe I want to have an ID for this particular link, and then the ID is Virginia Tech. And then now I want to use Virginia Tech color for this particular text. So I'm going to specify ID selector with using hashtag. Again, open a curly bracket, and then I'm going to set this to Chicago maroon color. I wonder if I can have shadow or something. Shadow, font shadow maybe. And then obviously you can see that I don't really recall anything. Font weight. Okay, font weight. And let's use suggested value, maybe bold, and then save it. Now you got to look at this part. If I refresh, now it has Virginia Tech color now, and then the font weight is bolder than before. Cool, so this is how I select ID. Next thing is class selector. Again, class is something that we learned, and then actually class was about classifying elements. Class is used to classify elements into a conceptual group. And one element can belong to multiple classes. One class can have more than one elements. So let's try that. So in my example, this phone number was for this phone number where it belongs to a class named tel, and then class selector use dot, like, dot syntax. So here, as if we were using hashtag for ID, for class, we're going to use this dot to use class name. So here, .css file, I'm going to say, I'm going to put it here, dot tell and curly bracket. And because it's number, maybe I'm going to use different fonts, like font family. And like monospace seems like a good candidate for numbers. So I'm going to save it. And then refresh this page. And then imagine what's going to happen. Now I have 3 telephone number that belongs to one class. Just for the sake of, making it look different, I'm gonna change the number to 7, 8, 9, so it looks different. Save it. If I refresh, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen is now it uses monospace font, which is pretty good for number presentation. And you can tell that this was this class selector is going to apply this CSS rule to all the elements that belongs to that particular class. And it doesn't have to be, within this, one parent. It could be anywhere. So let's say I'm going to grab this class and then maybe put it here, which is like basically now this particular hyperlink has ID as well as class. So this is the part that you should look at when I refresh. But basically what it says is that, hey, the color is specified the ID selector, and the font family is specified by the class selector. So let's refresh it. Now it is in font, different font. Let's try something else. Let's try, can we add this class to somewhere else, just for the sake of, maybe this one. How about this? I'm going to use this, but even though this is not, tell, let me actually create a new class, because here I'm specifying technical skills. I'm going to say programming language, and then use this class for this guy, and this guy. And then use this, and then again, it doesn't have to be, the class name, it doesn't have to be, it could be pretty long, like a variable name. So here I'm going to say class selector, programming language, and then maybe font family is, let's try something else. Let's try serif, whatever it is. So you should look at this part. If I refresh, now it has a different font family. Okay, so you got the idea, hopefully. This is how we use class selector, how to specify class, like, HTML elements that has specific class value. Again, I think I told you that one element can belong to multiple classes. So for example, just for the sake of testing, what I'm going to do is add one more class only for Python. And like I'm going to use tell just for experimenting. So what happens if I refresh just for Python? Nothing happens. Interesting. Oh, it's because one is saying to use monospace, the other is saying to use, serif. So let's do something else. How about this? Like, certain programming languages are for web. So I'm going to create a class called web. And then in here, I'm going to say, hey, for web class, I'm going to use color to be color of what? Pink, maybe? I don't know why, but if I do this, now this particular item, even including the bullet, like bullet item, like it's now in pink. So instead of pink, maybe something else is better. Maybe use hex code, pretty dark, with some more blue, maybe some blue in it. I don't know if you can see the difference. It doesn't look like it's working. Okay, so we're gonna debug it. Open the inspector and then locate this particular element. And then now it has programming language and web. And the web has this color. Oh, maybe this color is too dark. It's not obvious at all. So maybe do something like this. Change the hex code and then refresh. Now it has blue color. Okay, so I don't know if I've been tracking time. Let me check. But we have been looking at selectors. And then I guess I want to finish up to selector at least. So we looked at 3 different kinds of selector. Tag selector, which is basically you specify tag name. ID selector, which is you use like hashtag and then ID name. And then class selector, you use dot and then class name. Now we're going to talk about how to combine 2 different selectors. So here, you can imagine this selector 1 could be any of the things that we looked at so far, any of the selector that we looked at so far. Like for example, it could be tag selector, it could be class selector, it could be ID selector. So here, the example is when you have 2 selector and then you just specify, you just put them right next to each other without blank even. And it means that select elements that are selected by both selector 1 and selector 2. So it's kind of like an intersection. Like if you have like elements that has both of them, and then you can specify CSS rules for that particular thing, particular elements. The second, like if you put comma between 2 selector, it means then select elements that are selected by selector 1 or selector 2. So basically you can see, hey, H1 comma H2, I'm going to use the same color. So let's actually try that. So instead of this 2, I'm going to say, hey, H1 and H2, I'm going to make them use exactly the same color and then get rid of this. And then what's going to happen here is that H1 color is now this Chicago maroon, and then now H2 is going to use the same color. So if I refresh, now you can see the difference. Maybe another one that we can do is I could possibly combine these two maybe. Put this, put comma, and then dot web, and put this guy here. And then what's going to happen is that address book, or like, the HTML element whose ID is address book, or HTML elements whose class is web, is going to apply. I mean, we're going to apply these two rules: font size 20 pixel and this particular blue color. So what's going to happen is that this particular part is under address book. So you can see, oh, do we not have it? Oh, this is the thing. Okay, so this is address book. And then we're going to use 20 pixel and then this blue color. And then this, now it used blue color and 20 pixel. So it's going to get larger and then it's going to get blue. Check it out. Oops, no. Why not? Because we did not save it. I'll save it. Refresh again. Now this is now blue and this is like bigger and blue. Okay, so let's actually, this was like me trying this comma thing. Let's restore it. Next one is space. So if we have a space between selector 1 and 2, it means that select all elements of selector 2 that are inside elements of selector 1. So it means that, let's say, basically, what's a good example? So let's say I'm gonna select A. We have two A tag. One is for Twitter, one is for Virginia Tech. And then I'm gonna get rid of ID for a moment for testing. So if you go back and refresh the page, Virginia Tech has HTML hyperlink, and then Twitter has hyperlink, and email has hyperlink. But what I'm gonna do is, so this is using P tag, but this guy I'm gonna use div tag instead of P tag. And then use div A and PA. But basically what it's saying is that I'm going to select the A tag element under div, any div, and then A tag element under any P. So here I'm going to say background color should be red, and then P, A under P, background color should be blue, just for the sake of being apparent. So this is, these two guys is under P tag, if I remember correctly. So this is under P tag, like so, and then this particular link is under div element. So it's gonna look red. So my expectation is this is gonna look blue, and this is gonna look red. Okay, let's refresh it. Yes. So now I can select a certain element that is under a certain selector. So again, I'm using tag selector, but this could be anything. Like this could be div dot tell, or div dot, like, ul dot web programming, any selector that we have learned so far. Okay, so let's just like briefly go over everything. Like, if you use this like greater than sign, it's going to select all elements of selector 2, where the parent is like elements of selector 1. So it's very similar to what we saw. The only difference is that it's going to look at only the direct parent, and it's going to look at any ancestor, which means that it could be grandfather, it could be grand-grandfather, and so forth. So these like the relationship between this and this should be like immediate child and parent. These like this and this is just like ancestor and descendant relationship. Plus sign is for selecting something like that immediately followed by. So select all elements of selector 2 that are placed immediately after element of selector 1. So it's looking for adjacent HTML elements. So let's try one time. So here we have image, and then right after image we have p tag. Do we have any other image? Only one image. Okay, so maybe that's not a good idea. How about input? So p and input are adjacent to each other. So I'm going to say p plus input. And then what would I do? Like font size to be 100 pixel, just to make it apparent. So save it. So I wonder if you can imagine what's going to happen is, so p plus input means that this is p and this is input. Basically, we're going to select all input elements that are placed immediately after p elements. So we have 2 input elements in this HTML file. Oh, actually only one. So let me actually add one more. So let's say button 1, and let's say button 2. So let's save it, and then if I refresh, what's going to happen is that we have 2 buttons, and the first button is slightly bigger than the second button. Is it because of that thing? Let's try this guy. Okay. For some reason, 100 pixel is not big enough, interestingly. How about 20? 20? Maybe it's capped by the button. Okay, never mind. So basically, I'm going to use font weight as an example, bolder. So p plus input is going to look for input element that is immediately after p tag, p like tag element. So you can see that p, here's a p tag, and then we have 2 input. So this input element is immediately after p tag. So basically it's like a, I don't know, like a sibling, like, closest, like, in terms of like in terms of proximity, closest sibling. But this is like you have, this is not the like immediate one. So it's gonna only change this one, the style of this one. So let's save it and then check out this part, and it's gonna make the label bolder, hopefully. Nope. Interesting. Okay, so let me debug it a little bit. inspector. Font weight probably doesn't matter. Another function in inspector, you have like a checkbox for all the property and value pair. You can basically toggle like that particular property by unclicking, clicking. So I don't know if you see it, but like this blue right now. But if I uncheck it, now it's like black. Now it's crossed out. And then you can even add a new one. So let me check, let me see if I can add a border. Okay, so that's cool. So border is solid. So let's actually refresh it and add the border. And then it's gonna change the border only for the first button because this is the input tag that is exists immediately after P, which is what this combinator, CSS combinator does. Okay, so plus once there, tilde is basically like it's very similar to this plus, except that it's gonna select all the siblings instead of the very first one. So if I do this, if I do tilde, what it's gonna do is basically, because input is another sibling of another input element that is sibling of P tag, it's going to change the border to blue. So again, you can change the selector here as well. You can do plus and then press enter. It's going to change. If I put comma, what's going to happen? P comma input is basically one or B, A or B. So it's going to change the border of P tag and input tag as well. So it's going to look pretty interesting. You know, there are two P block and then two button, and it's going to create a border for all the elements, all the P elements and input elements. Instead of comma, what can we try? What can we try? This guy, we don't have any of them. It's not gonna work. Okay, so let's go back. There are a few more selectors, like, attribute selector is basically, you can select the HTML elements based on certain like an attribute value. So in this case, it's going to look for input HTML tag whose type is radio button. Be nice to have it here. So I wonder if everyone remember this particular attribute, which is target. And then if target is equal to underscore blank, it's going to open a page in a new tab. So you can actually have a different style for that. So let's actually try this. So we have three A tag. One is for email, one is for Twitter, and then it's using target blank. And the last one is for Virginia Tech. But if you do this, it means that what I'm going to do is, rather than color, I'm going to change the font family to fantasy. So now what it's going to do is that it's going to find a tag, and then if target is equal to blank, if the if that A element has target attribute and that target attribute value is underscore blank, it's going to change the font family to fantasy. So let's try. So based on the code that we have, Twitter has this target attribute, but this Virginia Tech does not have target attribute. So it should just change the target, like the font family of the Twitter link, not this one. So let's refresh. Now you can see this is in fantasy font family. Okay, so there are other ways to select based on attributes, like, there's tilde equal, and then each syntax has different meaning. Begin with, ends with, substring, exists, and so forth. So for example, this is example where, if there's a hyperlink and then URL includes W3 school, we can maybe style it differently. So, this is not, we're not going to use this too much, but this is nice to know. The last one is element state selector, which is, and then we're going to use colon. And element state is, it's kind of like, whether this is like being clicked or being hovered or active, focus, and so forth. And then obviously I don't know every element state, and then you have a good reference here. So it's going to select elements with a specific state. And then that specific states are specified in this website. It's going to have a big table. So active, active link, checked, disabled, empty, and so forth. Like there are lots of element state. So let's try one thing. Let's try, for our case, and then we don't need to combine with this A. We can have hover. So colon, hover, and then hover is basically, what it means is select links on mouse over. If we have mouse over on a certain element, it's in the hover state. So I'm going to do hover, and then if there's a mouse over, I'm going to change the border to solid, which means that I'm going to add a border to that particular element, which is going to be pretty interesting because it almost looks now, it's like the website is going to look pretty interactive. So if I refresh it and then move the cursor, now you can see the border of elements that I'm pointing at. See? Right now, interesting thing is that like having this mouse cursor here is actually hovering over 3 different elements, like this span element, and then li element, and ul element. So I don't know if you remember this, but going to reference, you have this structure, ul, li, and span, and then now you see 3 bordered element. And then you can see the whole body of the document is has border now, because whenever I use my mouse cursor, it's still in the body element. Pretty interesting, right? Okay, so that was hover, and then you can change, like, maybe a visited. Now visited link will look differently, maybe color should be white. And then if I, like these are purple right now because it's visited. But right now it's like white because I visited all the links. You can change it to black. Save it. Now we got black. And then again, another interesting function of inspector is that you can change the element state. So let's try this out. Now you can see all the style because it's visited, like it's using black. But right now, I can change the element state. So right now is these are the existing element state. Right now it's visited, but let's say I'm gonna say active. Or hover. So hover means that we actually got rid of hover. Then we get rid of voter. Hover. And then I'm going to create like a red border. So again, don't worry about these property name and then value at the moment. We're going to come back to this. But I'm going to create a red border when I'm hovering over. But like, you know, interesting thing is that like I can change the state of certain element just by change this, like, you know, change the element state in the inspector. So because I'm using hover, you can see on the left side, even though my mouse cursor is not on the element, it changed its style to hover state, which is basically this guy. Okay, so I think that's about the old Salter. And I'm pretty sure, I think I promised that I'm going to make this particular lecture shorter, but I think I spent all 75 minutes. I'm not tracking time, so I don't know. Basically, you know, the reason why I create this recording like at 5 a.m. in the morning is that because it takes so long time to process the recording, and then last time it took almost like 3 hours. So it means that I cannot really do the lecture in real time. So, okay, so I think that's that. I'm not gonna have any quiz today. But all the stuff that I learned, like we learned today, like including selector, ID, class, and CSS inclusion, like, you know, these will be on quiz next time. Okay, so that's it for today. I may upload another video today for homework, and we're going to release another homework today, which is due in 2 weeks. And it's going to be pretty interesting homework. And then we're going to have a chance to go over homework separately in the separate video. Okay, until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.